Hello and welcome to the first episode of this series. In this episode and in this series, basically, I want to talk about component communication in Angular. So we all know that our applications can be decomposed into different components, and more often than not, those components need to be able to communicate with one another. So to, for example, send some data from one component to another component. And we also know that components can have like relationships, like parent-child relationships, right? So we are going to, talk about these different, concepts and techniques that we have when we want to kind of, establish communication between our components. So the series is suitable for people who have some experience developing Angular applications. I'm not going to talk about, the very, let's say, basic stuff, right? I am going to, of course, talk about the things that are important to us and also other, related stuff. And as always, this is going to be very hands-on, a very practical playlist. We are going to implement everything inside of Visual Studio Code. And of course, I have my notes that I am going to go through in each episode. Again, you can, clone the repository of this playlist using the link I have provided in the description of the videos. Feel free to clone the repository from my GitHub page, explore the code base for each episode. We are going to create separate branches so you can easily navigate to different branches and explore the code. We are going to develop an application for like a real domain, like an airline company. So we will have different components. Those components need to be able to communicate with one another. So we will try to keep the playlist focused on the topics that are important to us. If, for example, you want to know about, let's say, data fetching in Angular applications, you can refer to my other playlists on the channel. In this playlist, in this series, the focus is going to be on component communication. And of course, as I said, I assume you have some experience developing Angular applications. If that's not the case, the series will be a little bit overwhelming for you. Again, if you want to learn the basics of Angular, there are other playlists on the channel that you can refer to kind of get started with Angular. So let's get started. This is the first episode, episode number 1. The goals of this episode is to set up the Angular workspace. We are going to create our domain with some model classes. We are going to create some components, some services, and there are some other stuff that I need to talk about. So the first thing that I want to do is to create my Angular application using the Angular CLI ng-new. One thing that I decided to talk about in this series is the prompts that you get when you are creating an Angular application. So let's go through these. The first time you start to use Angular CLI, you will get this prompt. So the moment you start creating an Angular application, you will get this prompt, which is asking you a question. So it says, would you like to share pseudonymous usage data about this project with the Angular team at Google under Google's privacy policy at blah, 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 blah. So this message, as I said, appears when you're using the CLI for the first time or after you have reset your settings. Now let's talk about this a little bit because chances are you encounter this prompt. So I would like to discuss this a little bit. So what is it asking? Again, as I said, Angular is asking whether you'd like to allow it to collect anonymous or pseudonymous usage data. Pseudonymous usage data about the way you use Angular CLI. For example, the commands you run, how often you use Angular CLI, and so on. So this is pseudonymous usage data. It means that it doesn't directly identify you, so it is not associated with your username or email, but it might include a unique identifier so that Google can track the usage patterns of CLI over time, so that they can improve Angular CLI. Again, why are they asking you this question? The Angular team at Google uses this data to understand which features are popular, find performance bottlenecks or bugs, prioritize improvements based on the real usage of CLI, and justify continued investment in the CLI. So basically, They're tracking some changes. They're collecting some pseudonymous usage data in order to be able to improve Angular CLI. And then the data is collected under Google's privacy policy. And you can also use this single command using the Angular CLI, ng analytics enable and ng analytics disable, to kind of enable or disable this data collection. So if, for example, you want to, let's say you have answered yes, but later on you want to disable this, you can use ng analytics disable. Should you say yes or no? Again, if you're okay with helping the Angular team improve the CLI and you do not mind Google collecting some non-personal usage data, you can go ahead and answer yes. Or if you're not okay with this, you can say no. Again, if you say no, there is no impact on your ability to use Angular. You can, safely say no and continue using Angular CLI. The next thing that you will see is this. So it says global setting disabled, local setting, no workspace configuration file, effective status disabled. If you answer no, you will get these 3 lines, right? Again, on my machine, this is not the first time I'm using Angular CLI. So when I create my application, I won't get this prompt. But if you're running Angular CLI for the first time, you will get these. So Angular CLI analytics status message. When you answer no, you will get these 3 messages. It says global setting disabled, local setting no local workspace configuration file, effective status disabled. So this is telling you about the Angular CLI analytics settings. When it says global setting disabled, it means that you basically have globally disabled that pseudonymous usage data, or you have used this command because you have answered no, right? So local setting no local workspace configuration file. It means that you are basically not inside, a folder that contains an Angular project right now. There's no Angular.json. So there's no project-specific local analytics setting. And when it says effective status disabled, it means that data collection thing has been disabled because, again, you answered no. And as I said, if you want to enable that again, you can go ahead and use this command. Now, let me go ahead and create this application. The application that we want to create is going to be called airline booking. So here, I'm going to say ng new airline booking. So this is the application that I am going to create. Again, remember, this is not the first time I'm running this command, this CLI command, so I will not get that data collection confirmation message here. I have disabled that on my machine. But when you enter this command, you will get this question. So it is basically asking you about the different style sheet formats that you can use: CSS, SAS, less, and so on. Let's talk about these a little bit. So this is basically the second question that you get. Style sheet format prompt. Which style sheet format prompt would you like to use? CSS, SAS, SAS indented, or less? This is part of the Angular CLI. So it is asking you what format you want to use to style your components. Again, CSS, as you might know, is the standard web styling language. Simple. There is no setup required. You've got the option to use SAS. SAS is more powerful. It has some features like variables, nesting, mixins, and so on. So it is it is very similar to regular CSS, but there are other features. Then you've got SAS indented. Again, same as SAS, but again, with different, indentation-based syntax. There are no curly braces or semicolon. It is not that common. And of course, you've got less. Less is a CSS processor, preprocessor. And it also supports things like variables, mixins, and so on. So again, as I said, the focus of this course is not on styling, but I wanted to talk about these prompts. The focus of this course is on communication, so component communication. So we are going to go ahead and use CSS for now for our styles. And of course, there are some recommendations. If you're not sure which one to use, just go ahead and pick CSS or pick SAS if you want more powerful, flexible styling format. So I'm going to go ahead and choose CSS. That is the next question that you get. So it says, do you want to enable SSR or server-side rendering or SSG pre-rendering, which is static site generation. I want to discuss these two and then choose no for now. But before I do that, let's talk about SSR and SSG. So SSR, server-side rendering. The name kind of, tells you what it means. So the rendering is going to happen on the server, right? Not on the client. But let's explore this. So Angular renders your pages on the server if you go with SSR. Using Node.js is going to, render your pages on the server. Then it kind of sends that fully rendered HTML to the browser. What are the advantages? Improved initial load time and SEO. So if you're developing, a website like an e-commerce web application that kind of needs SEO visibility, you should go with server-side rendering. It kind of, helps with SEO. Then you've got SSG, or static site generation or pre-rendering. Again, if you, answer yes to this question, it means that Angular will pre-generate static HTML files for your pages at build time. When you build the application, some static HTML files will be created for your pages. So a static site generation. That one was server-side rendering. So instead of, on-demand things like, for example, SSR. So again, this is ideal for blogs, for landing pages, or for sites that basically do not have a lot of dynamic data. Again, Angular uses Angular Universal for SSR and SSG. This is not the topic of this playlist, of this course, but I might be able to create another playlist for Angular Universal. Again, what happens if you say yes or no? If you say yes, Angular will set up Angular Universal in your project. You will have additional files like, for example, server.ts, and Angular will configure the app to support both SSR and pre-rendering. This is, as I said, useful for applications that would like to have SEO, visibility, like e-commerce web application, blogs, marketing pages, and so on. If you say no, you will get a standard client-side render or CSR Angular app. This is something that we will choose, right? So again, faster to build and simpler to maintain. But if you don't need SEO, this is good, right? If you don't need SEO, just go with client-side rendering or CSR. And if you do not, require the performance benefits that SSR or server-side rendering, provides. So again, when to enable this, as I said, when you care about SEO, go with SSR. If your site needs to appear in Google search results, if you want to improve first load performance, if your app has pages that can be pre-rendered, like for example, product pages, again, go with SSR. And if you're building an internal dashboard, if you're developing an admin panel, if your app is like an application behind a login, let's say, mechanism, where SEO is not that important for you, go with no. So answer no. In our case, we are going to say no. So let me go to my, VS Code. This is the, prompt, and I am going to say no, and I'm going to let the application get created. The next step for us is to create some components. So again, component communication is the focus of this course, right? We are going to have different components, as you can see, and we are going to create 3 services for now. We will, work with these. We will refactor these, and we will, change them throughout the course. But this is the things that I want to create for now. And this is the folder structure. So in the components folder, I'm going to have this flights folder. Then I've got I'm going to have my bookings folder and my passengers. I'm going to have a shared, folder for notification and some services. And of course, I'm going to create a models folder to create my model classes. So let me go ahead. The application is ready now. I'm going to, get into the folder, and I am going to run the code to, create the components and the services. So you know that using ng gc, you can create, let's say, application items, if you will, like components, services, and so on. So it is like scaffolding, let's say, mechanism. It kind of creates your service classes, your components, and so on. It is a command that you can use using CLI. I'm going to close out this guy, and as you can see, I've got my application In the source folder, I've got my components, I've got my services, right? And inside of my services, I've got my notification service, my flight service. I will probably change the structure of these a little bit, during the future episodes. So I'm going to create my models folder now. So what I want to do now is to go ahead and define some model classes. So some TypeScript, right, to create some model classes, like for example, flight, passenger, booking, and the names of the files: flight model TS, passenger model TS, and booking model TS. So flight model TS, flight model.ts, and then passenger model.ts, and booking model.ts. So booking model.ts. And then I am going to get started with the flight model.ts. So again, as I said, it's going to be a simple interface. We're going to export it. There are some properties like ID origin, destination, departure time, arrival time, and so on. And the next thing that I want to do is to go to the passenger model, passenger model TS, this guy. I'm going to create this passenger model with different properties. So loyalty status can have different values: regular, silver, and gold. And then the booking. So let's go with the booking. Again, I've got flight ID, I've got passenger ID, and the status is confirmed, either confirmed, canceled, or pending. So I'm going to close out these, right? And I will, as I said, create branches for each episode. So let me go ahead and what I can do is to create a new branch probably here. I'm going to call this episode 1, and then I am going to commit my changes on this episode, on this branch. So let me go ahead and continue with the notes. So the next thing is to provide some dummy data in our flight service. As you can see, we've got this flight service, and this flight service is going to create an array called flights, and it's going to provide us with this getFlights method, right, to return those flights. So let me go ahead, find the flight service TS. I'm going to get rid of the code here and create my flight service. And I am going to talk about two very important things in this service. So the injectable decorator, as well as the observables coming from ArcJS, as well as the off operator. So let me create two dummy flights for now, and let's create the getFlights method. So the first thing that I want to do is to add some imports. So I'm going to import observable from ArcJS. I will probably create another course for ArcJS specifically. Again, ArcJS is not the topic of this course, but we will encounter ArcJS frequently. Let's talk about some of the parts, important parts in this service. So the first thing that I want to talk about is injectable. This is a decorator. So what is injectable? It is a decorator, like @ component, that you use when you want to create components. So if you, for example, go to one of these components that we have created, for example, the booking form component, if you go to the TypeScript file, not the test file, this one, you see this is another decorator, right? So it kind of decorates this class, this TypeScript class, with this component decorator, meaning that it's going to be treated as a component. So this @injectable, it is a decorator that tells Angular that this class can be injected as a dependency. Angular uses dependency injection. So it means that Angular can create and manage an instance of this class automatically, and then this class will be injected into the components that need this class. So what does provided in root mean, right? So if you take a look here, we are using this injectable, and then we are saying provided in root. So provided in root means that it kind of tells Angular to provide this service at the root level of your application. So Angular will create a single shared instance of the flight service for the entire app, like a singleton instance, if you're familiar with singleton. So this is very efficient and ensures that all of your components that need this service will get one single instance of this service, and will get the data that flights array that we have created inside of this service. So an analogy. So think of an injectable provided in root as this sentence. So you're telling Angular basically, Angular, make this class available everywhere in the app. Create one single instance of this class and inject it into the components that require that dependency. And then we've got the get flights, function or method, which returns an observable. And the type of the observable is an array of flight model class that we just created. So this is a public method that returns a stream of flight data. What is observable? So an observable, right? An observable is a concept coming from RxJS. So using observables, basically, you can emit an array of flight objects. You can have a stream of data, right? So in Angular, observables are commonly used when you're doing data fetching, when you are working with event streams, or when you are doing reactive programming. Again, not the, let's say, primary focus of this course, but something that we will encounter frequently. So our, get flights is going to return an observable, and the type of the, data is an array of our model class flight. And then inside of the method, let me get to the service one more time. We are using this of, and then we are passing the array that we defined above, right? We defined here. Let's talk about this of. So what is this of? Of is a function from RxJS. It creates an observable that, this is the behavior of. It immediately emits the given value. The given value in this case is an array of flights. So in this case, it creates an observable and emits that array immediately. So again, as I said, I'm going to probably create another course for RxJS. When you know about RxJS, when you get familiar with RxJS, you will better understand what this immediately, means here. But again, this is not the focus of this course. We're going to, skip talking about this in full detail here. Just remember that using the get flights, we are returning some dummy data from our service for now. So why return an observable instead of just, an array? So because in Angular, when you are dealing with data, real data that comes from, asynchronous courses like your backend API, you need observables. So you use observables because observables make, the method, the data fetching thing consistent when you are using HTTP client and then you're using get to get some data. You basically, do the data fetching with the backend API that you have. Right now, there is no backend API. We're hard coding some dummy data, but we're still using observables. So components can now subscribe to the data, and when new data arrives using the observable, because we're kind of, receiving a stream, an asynchronous stream of data, whenever new flights arrive, we can react to those. Now, the next thing that we want to do is to display our flights in our flight list component. We have a flight list component, and we are going to, as you can see, inject a dependency. We are going, that service is our dependency, flight service. We're going to create this, flights array, and we are going to have our ng-on-init as our lifecycle method. And when the ng-on-init is invoked, we are going to use our dependency, call that get events, get flights, method that will return an observable. We are going to subscribe to that observable. We are going to get the data that the observable is going to give us, that is the flights array. And when we get that flights array, we're going to capture that into the flights array that we are, maintaining in our component. So let's get to the flight list component. Flight list component TS, and then I am going to, get rid of this code and write this flight list component. So now some imports. We're going to use the flight, type from our models, and then the service. So right now, when the component, initializes, we are going to call that service and capture the thing that the service that get flight is going to return. We're going to capture that inside of this flights array. So ng on init, you know that, right? It's a lifecycle hook. It runs automatically when the component is initialized. When I say initialize, it means right after the constructor is created or is invoked. So it is the best place to put initialization logic, especially when you are doing some data fetching. So think of ng on init as this. Run this code when the component first loads and is ready. Then you've got this piece of code. So this, as you can see, is going to call the getFlights method that we just talked about from our flight service. And as we explained earlier, this getFlights is going to return an observable of arrays of flights, if you will. We're going to subscribe to that. So you subscribe to an observable. It means that you want to consume the data that that observable provides. So you're telling Angular when the observable emits data, the data that the observable is going to emit is an array of flights. When the observable emits data, give it to me and I'll do something with it. This is basically what subscribe means. So in this case, what we are doing with that data is that we're capturing that data into the private, local flights array that we have inside of our component. So this means when the list of flights is available, store it in the flights property of this component. This is what we are doing with the data that the get flights is going to return. So what does this whole block do? Again, this whole block is doing this. When the component is created, it's going to call the flight service to get a list of flights. It's going to subscribe to the observable so it can receive the data. And when the data arrives, it's going to capture that data into that flights array defined inside of the component. The next thing that I would like to do is to show what we have inside of that, flights array inside of this component in our template. So basically, we're going to have, a UL element with a kind of an LI element, right? With our directive ng4, we're going to loop over the flights array, and for each flight, we're going to print the origin, destination, departure time, using pipe. We're going to format it as a short time. So let me go ahead to the flight list. So flight list HTML. I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to write the code for my flight list. In order to use directives, like for example ng4, you need to import common module in your component. So I'm going to do that. So I am going to go to my component here. I am going to import common module. And now if I get back to the HTML code, that error has disappeared. So the next thing that I want to do is to update my app component. I'm going to render the flight list component and router outlet because we will be doing some routing. And we're going to update the app component TS as well. In the app component TS, we are going to create this title property called airline booking. This is inside of the app component TypeScript file, and we will make use of this title property shortly. So let me go to app component. This is the app component. This is the default code that Angular provides you with. Then you've got app flight list. Of course, I need to go to my app component TS file. I need to import my flight list component, and of course I've got this title here as well, airline booking. Now if I go back, that error has disappeared. So the summary of episode number 1. Right now we've got like a simple but fully bootstrap Angular application with different services and different components. The domain model classes for flights, passengers, bookings. We've got some services, even though they're only kind of creating some dummy data. That'll change, of course. And we've got one fully functional flight list component, and we are going to build upon that. We are going to develop that in future episodes. And that was it. That was it for this first episode. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. Again, if that's the case, Don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next one.